It is Tuesday, November 3rd, 2021. My name is Emma Bigland in for Sam Cedar, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Ursula Hackett, author of America's Voucher Politics, How Elites Learned to Hide the State. Meanwhile, Biden has renominated Jerome Powell for another 4-year term as the Fed chair because bipartisanship. Trump had ousted Janet Yellen for this role and appointed Powell, but Biden is taking the bold stance of cementing the bipartisan commitment to corrupt elite bankers. Important work. COVID cases are ticking up again as Thanksgiving nears, with federal medical teams being dispatched to Minnesota hospitals to help out. Michigan is also seeing a surge. Ahmaud Arbery's murder case, his murder, is set to be decided soon, as the defense made closing arguments today, or yesterday, I should say, in which the defense attorney made her case by describing Arbery's toenails as a reason why his death may have been justified. Seriously, so the prosecution will make their final rebuttal today. The New York State Assembly has concluded an eight-month investigation into the allegations of sexual harassment against former Governor Andrew Cuomo and found, quote, overwhelming evidence corroborating the claims. The DOJ will pay $130 million to the Parkland shooting victims after the FBI failed to properly investigate 2 tips about the eventual shooter months before the mass killing. The FBI was probably too busy spying on mosques or Black Lives Matter protesters or something. And lastly, Yemen remains under attack by the Saudi-led coalition, which just launched air raids on the Yemeni capital. This comes as the Biden administration is proposing a $650 million arms sale to Saudi Arabia as we speak. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen, and Bradley. Bradley did it. He did it. His first solo intro. He is now doing something like 3 jobs right now with Matt out today. So 3 cheers to Bradley. He was able to pull that off seamlessly. Much appreciated. As you can tell, Sam's out today. I was out on Friday and Monday. So we're kind of passing the ball back and forth a little bit here, but I appreciate everybody tuning in, and we have a great show. I had a bit of a whirlwind few days. Friday, I had to travel to a funeral and drive a long way. Drove back Saturday. Sunday, packed up my apartment, moved on Monday, and I threw out my back moving yesterday. So I'm pretty much okay if I don't stand up. So luckily, I don't have to do that. Bradley's, your 4th job is going to be wheeling me across Brooklyn back to my new place, so I can do some more unpacking.
I'll get you groceries.
Yeah, very exciting. You know, you have Matt's special mic here. You can speak into that. Now you are no longer in the box.
Wow.
Wow, look at that. All right, great stuff by Bradley. Again, apologies if, there was a little bit of a delay at the beginning, but we really definitely pulled it off. So some news to get to today. Chris Christie is the gift that keeps on giving, honestly. Chris Christie's going on this book tour, basically, and he's making the rounds all across Fox News and other cable networks. There's a section in his book on disinformation, and he does not go after Fox News, which is clearly strategic. He was pressed by Nicole Wallace on MSNBC, if you'll recall, about why he didn't target Fox News when trying to dispel the Republican Party of QAnon and Pizzagate and things like that, even though that is the Republican Party. So tough news for the former governor of New Jersey. He said he doesn't watch Tucker Carlson's show, but he does mention that he watches Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity. So I guess he just misses just doesn't tune in to the top-rated cable show of all time. He is not of all time, but maybe. He has enormous literacy in Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity, but Tucker Carlson, just everything about him just flies out of his brain. So when we were talking about Chris Christie and this seemingly endless book tour, we had a debate on the show over whether who was the biggest Trump cuck. Sam made the case for Chris Christie. I tried to make the case for Ted Cruz because that photo of him phone banking for Trump is just so endlessly generous in the gifts that it provides to us after Trump basically called his wife ugly and said his dad killed JFK. But unfortunately for us, Sam's case gets stronger and stronger every day with Chris Christie. Here he is on Laura Ingraham's show, basically kissing Donald Trump's ring while also trying to lay the groundwork for his own probable run in 2024, which is the whole purpose of this book tour.
Trump does decide to run, no one knows what the heck he's going to do. But if he does decide to run and he gets the nomination, you're going to support him, though, right? You're not going to go voting for Biden or supporting Biden or whoever the Democrats nominate, right?
I answered this question today on the PBS NewsHour. I said, they asked me directly, could you vote for Joe Biden? I said, absolutely not. I didn't vote for him in 2020, and I certainly couldn't vote for him in 2024. And I cannot support someone like Bernie Sanders, people like Elizabeth Warren. Go through the whole list of the people who were standing on that stage in 2020 and assume that any one of them is the nominee. I couldn't vote for that person. No.
Yeah. So what you don't like about Trump is more personality or backward-looking stuff. The policies you liked, correct?
Look, the policies I supported, and Laura,
that
the line of supporting Donald Trump starts behind me. I was the first elected official in America to endorse him in 2016. Prepped him for those debates, prepped him in 2020 for the debates, and stood up for him as the chairman of his opioid commission and the chairman of his transition. But we lost, Laura, and we've got to get back to winning. We see the ramifications of not winning.
Well, absolutely.
They're happening with all this spending, with the crime and everything else. And so what I'm saying to Republicans
is, election. Got to look forward.
We got to stop complaining, and we got to start working to be a contrast to Joe Biden and to stop him in his tracks in 2022. And every minute we spend looking backwards is a minute we're not spending stopping them. I don't want to go through any more years of Democrat control.
All right, Governor Christie, good to see you.
So there was a lot there, right? I mean, he uses the Trump language even. We've got to get back to winning. Maybe when he caught Trump's COVID, allegedly, he caught some of his mannerisms as well, right? I mean, that would make a ton of sense. But as I mentioned earlier, he's trying to thread this impossible needle here of wanting to be incredibly deferential to Trump because he knows where his bread is very, very thinly buttered and it's by Donald Trump and the Republican Party. He needs to show deference to Trump. And his ideal scenario is that Trump is not going to run in 2024. And then he's able to say, I was the first in line for Donald Trump. I think he said he was the first elected official. I'm not sure that's actually true because Jeff Sessions may have beat him. That's true. Bradley? Great. Yeah, Jeff Sessions beat him to it. But he means he was the first loser to drop out of the presidential race in 2016 in the Republican primary to endorse Donald Trump. And that was surprising. And Chris Christie does have some instincts and was able to see, okay, the base is going in this direction. But his instincts should also tell him that I think Trump's going to try to run again. And there's really no place for you. He's able to cosplay and he's able to do his tough talk and be Trump light in many regards. But his critique of the Republican Party is just fairy dust. There's nothing that he's offering. There's nothing substantial, and there's nothing different that he's offering than Donald Trump except not being Donald Trump. And so the base is going to be like, well, you're not Donald Trump. It doesn't matter how he tries to toe this line. They're always going to want the real version. Chris Christie's I can't believe it's not butter. And Donald Trump is butter. And the base is just not going to go for whatever he's trying to pull off here. And if Trump doesn't run in 2024, I actually will be surprised at this point because because the ground is laid for him to have a lot of success. And the more I see Chris Christie kind of flounder and attempt to have it both ways here, the more I realize, okay, I don't really know what the Republican Party can offer that's going to excite the base to the degree that Trump does. And that's really all you need. That's really all you need. All right, folks, we are going to take a quick break. Very quick. Gotta be quick, Martha. And then Ursula Hackett will be joining us, author of America's Voucher Politics, How Elites Learned to Hide the State. And with that, I have, under my computer, some exciting announcements today. So Sunset Lake CBD, and the Majority Report are teaming up to turn America's most consumerist holiday into a fundraising opportunity for a great organization. Give Directly. We've talked about this on this program before. Majority Report and Sunset Lake CBD for Black Friday are working together with Give Directly. Visit Sunset Lake CBD.com starting November 22nd. All CBD products will be between 30 and 60% off. Orders over $100 will receive a free jar of delicious CBD gummies. The gummies are dangerously good, and they work super well. I took 2, which maybe I shouldn't have done. I found myself being a little bit silly, and then I had a great sleep. A $40 value for free. No promo code needed. Products are already discounted on the website. So, as I mentioned, I love the gummies. I love the tincture that has some melatonin in it. I'm like the kind of person, my mind races at night and I have a little bit of trouble going to sleep because I just keep thinking about things I need to do. Sunset Lake CBD is very helpful in that regard. Sunset Lake CBD will donate 10% of its sales to GiveDirectly.org, an international anti-poverty organization that sends cash directly to choose for people to choose for themselves how to spend the money with dignity that best suits their lives. Majority Report is matching 10% of that donation as well. There's a lot of like paternalism in the way that some people choose to approach charity, and Give Directly does not engage in any of that, which I really appreciate. People know what's best for them. If you're giving money to help people out, just give them the money. And that's what Give Directly does. And Majority Report and Sunset Lake are going to be contributing in that effort. Sunset Lake CBD is a majority employee-owned business that has donated more than $16,000 this year to anti-drug organizations, animal shelters, union strike funds, national conservation, food shelves, and refugee resettlement organizations. Again, visit sunsetlakecbd.com to take advantage of these discounts and help Majority Report raise money for a great organization. The sale ends on December 1st. All right. Do we have Ursula? And here we are. We are joined now by Ursula Hackett. She is the author of America's Voucher Politics, How Elites Learn to Hide the State. Ursula, thank you so much for your time today. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I'm delighted to join you.
Yes. Thank you for being here. Let's just start then with, I guess, the premise of your book, which are vouchers and the rise in these kinds of programs, even, I mean, exploding post 2010 or post 2011. But we'll get into how the groundwork is laid. Just from a 30,000-foot view, take our viewers through a little bit of what you discussed in your book.
Okay, great. So, the book actually ranges over more than 100 years of American history and politics. But the really big story, as you say, is the one that has taken place primarily since 2010. And that is this absolute expansion of school voucher, tax credit voucher programs across the states, such that today we have more than half of US states have some form of voucher program in operation. By vouchers, I mean basically those programs that offer a sum of public money for parents to spend on private education for their kids, in whatever form that is, whether that's a tax credit scholarship or an education savings account or a regular voucher program. So, the big story I'm trying to tell in the book is what's going on here. I mean, why have we seen such a rapid, explosive growth in the number of these programs across the country when these programs face such formidable legal obstacles? You know, they face so many legal challenges in court.
Well, maybe part of it, too, is the courts are super conservative. I mean, part of I think what, and we can talk about how these fall on along political lines. But, I mean, part of, I think, what a lot of conservatives in America are trying is just, well, I mean, the courts are mostly on our side. If it goes to the Supreme Court, they're probably going to side with us, specifically if we're talking about religious schools, which we'll get into. I mean, there's really no downside for conservatives to try some of these things. We're seeing this with abortion, for example, the egregious Texas law. Just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So it's funny you should mention that. I mean, maybe we can get into this in a moment. I've just been writing a paper on precisely the issue that you mentioned on abortion and also the policy of gun control. So there's some really, really interesting stuff that's going on at the moment. But I think to come to your question, I mean, yeah, you're right. So there is this sense, I think now, that there is a supportive legal cushion for these programs. But that's not something that happened overnight. What I'm trying to show in the book is that this is a very strategic process that occurred over many, many decades, where primarily conservatives, whether that's in the early days, segregationists, racial conservatives, later on religious conservatives or individualists, seeking to try and insulate their programs from legal challenge and try and build up that level of legal cushion that exists today. So I think it's a very painful process. It's a process of trial and error where they've experienced multiple legal setbacks and political setbacks, but they're learning over time in a very forward-thinking way about how to achieve that success. So especially when they're concerned that maybe there are some arguments are going to be made in court, whether from teacher unions, concerned about questions of public education and educational adequacy and uniformity in things, or whether that's questions about establishment, of course, because so many of these voucher programs allow religious schools to be included, and or whether that's questions about equal protection and so on. So there's all sorts of these things that they're concerned about, and they have had all these setbacks. But what I'm showing in the book is they learn how to overcome that and achieve this extraordinary degree of success.
Yes, and what struck me so much about your book, too, is just how American this conversation is and how much it envelops so many different existential questions about, like, American governance. I mean, there's religion, separation of church and state, of course, teachers' unions, as you mentioned, and organized labor and the relationship that the United States has to organized labor is a part of this as well. There are just a variety of different, I mean, I said religion, but also racism too, and systemic racism is integral to this, taxation as well. I guess as somebody who studies American politics and how it moves forward and how it relates to history, I mean, how American is this relative to other conversations and other things that you've studied as well?
I think it is a very American conversation. I think that's right. No, I think it's that this is a work of American political development. So I think that we have to really understand these stories as taking place within the American constitutional framework, not only the national constitution, of course, but also all of these state constitutions. And I really love getting into the weeds about some of the language that exists in US state constitutions, like no aid provisions or Blaine amendments, which have been used to try and attack voucher programs. They're sort of basically amendments that say that you cannot provide any public aid to denominational institutions. And this is the really live question with the current Supreme Court as well, deciding on their constitutionality and acceptability. So these are really live questions, but I think it's very much an American story. And I frame it as such. But I think that there is a value perhaps in being an outsider. I'm zooming in here from London. I have a lot of American connections, but I think there is something to be said for having that external perspective and being able to kind of think about America as a case comparatively, and to draw back emotionally perhaps from the work. Although, of course, these are really quite absolutely vital and crucial questions, and I did find that hard at times.
Let's then, I guess, historicize or lay the groundwork for maybe we can divide this into three sections to start our conversation: pre Brown v. Board, post Brown v. Board, and then post 2010, I guess. Before Brown v. Board of Education, tell us a little bit about the history of public school and school programs and how conservatives fought back against this concept, which then, allowed for the voucher program in the post-Brown world to begin to take shape.
Okay. So, I think the first thing to say is that amongst the earliest iterations of these voucher programs were the tuition grant programs that were instigated in the US South in the immediate aftermath of Brown v. Board, basically because they're concerned that the public schooling system is desegregating and that they're going to try and evade that ruling by directing public funds to white parents to spend at private segregated academies. So that is amongst the earliest iterations, but there are a couple of voucher programs or voucher-like programs that were in existence even prior to those programs, like in Maine and Vermont, these sort of town tuitioning programs, which don't include religious schools, but which allowed public funds to be used to send kids to private schools. And actually, there's a big case that's coming up in the current US Supreme Court term that relates to Maine's town tuitioning program, Carson versus Mackin. So there's a question there about whether that's going to be come under fire. But really, yeah, so the earliest iterations were the ones in the South. And of course, what happens is there are several stages. So Brown v. Board happens. And of course, the courts are not able to compel the desegregation of the public schooling system immediately. And of course, we know that takes many, many years. But there are a variety of different strategies that different jurisdictions take in opposition to Brown v. Board. There's some where it's a sort of like, we're going to just resist. The Mississippis, the South Carolinas are just sort of saying that we massive resistance. And it takes a lot. They don't create tuition grant programs in the first wave because they're just resisting full on. Whereas I think in places like Georgia, places like Louisiana, like Virginia, they actually try these things out. It's kind of like a strategic thing, and they keep going back to the drawing board over and over again as they're finding this, they're getting sort of struck down as unconstitutional. So they say, right, well, okay, we'll create these programs. It's going to be, we're not going to mention race. We're going to try and sort of do that one down. We're going to try and maybe create even more complex means of administering those benefits. So instead of just, appropriating the money direct, you might sort of channel it through private financial assistance commissions. And this is absolutely mimicking a lot of what happens in the South in the aftermath of the tax, the civil, with civil rights advances, right? And they're sort of saying, okay, so what can we do with the white primary when that gets struck down? Well, we're going to privatize it, right? We're going to say parties are private organizations, and so you can't, it's harder for you to draw that kind of equal protection claim. And we're going to privatize swimming pools, we're going to privatize recreational facilities in such a way that we can try and evade this desegregation. And the same story plays out in the education sphere, and it reaches a really substantial number. There are thousands and thousands of these grants being handed out, and the courts are coming back to them again and again. The big problem for the segregationists, of course, is that no matter how often they're able to, some of them go to these incredible lengths, as I say, to create these convoluted means of directing the benefits through these commissions and saying, look, it's not the state involved, okay? It's private. It's the private choice of the parent. It is not the state. And that is the crucial legal distinction they're trying to make. But the courts are saying, well, hang on. The way in which you're talking about these is, we're doing this to keep segregation, and we're going to do it despite the brainwashers and the communists. They're just saying this out loud. So the courts have no trouble in drawing attention to that disjuncture between the way they're talking about it and the way in which this thing is administered. So what I'm saying in the book is I've got this idea of attenuated governance, right? This idea that there are circumstances in which it is politically expedient to direct your benefits through private organizations, like Louisiana did, for example, with respect to their tuition grants, or through the tax system, through tax expenditures, and through private individuals. So instead of appropriating the money directly, you give it to the parents. They can spend it on behalf of the child at the school. You've got a more attenuated link between the state on the one hand and the school on the other, the sort of legally suspect end. But that's not the end of the story, because if you're not careful about how you talk about these programs, if you're not strategic in your communications, then the courts are going to be able to smell a rat and are going to see that there is some disjuncture there, and it's going to be harder for it to hold up in court. So these strategies have to marry with one another, and the segregationists are not especially good at doing that.
Well, I mean, it seeps through eventually, right? There's only so many times you can talk about privatization before the real racism comes out, or taxpayer rights. I mean, that's something we've talked about on the show before, how school choice and so much of the conversation, even today, about that very topic, basically kind of relates to like, oh, these are my individual rights. I'm giving money to the state and I should be able to choose where it goes, although that doesn't apply necessarily to programs that are the benefits of them they're fine with, right? I mean, there's an inherent racism in the concept of the taxpayer, because you're implying that you have more rights than other people because you're giving more into the system and the rest of them are takers. And I feel like that's some of the ways that racists hide the ball when talking about topics like this.
I mean, I think it's really interesting. There's some very interesting sort of research that's been done on the sort of racial politics of vouchers, and I've published a great deal about this, and I've been in conversation with many colleagues about it. And I think it is an interesting, complex story, because when you kind of fast forward to the next couple of decades, and you kind of from that period of time where all these segregationist tuition grants get struck down as unconstitutional, flash forward a couple of decades, you kind of got these a few efforts here and there, but nothing really sticks. And then 1990, 1995, you get kind of Cleveland, you get Milwaukee, and they get the first sort of modern voucher schemes, as it were. And a lot of those were actually pushed by African-American state legislators who were concerned that, their kids were being failed by the public schooling system. And it's a very different sort of and quite interesting conversation where they're saying, Polly Williams, for instance, who was really instrumental in the Wisconsin effort. I mean, she's going, our kids are the ones waiting at these bus stops to be bused miles and miles and miles. I mean, we're being failed. We want to have options. We want choice. And that can be quite a potent message within the African-American community. But I think that the issue, the story that continues is that as we come into the sort of present day, there is a cooling, I think, of the sort of race conscious approach to vouchers. And there's a concern that these vouchers are actually being directed in ways that are not benefiting poor inner city kids, people of color, and that actually it's not being directed towards those particular aims. And so there is a concern, I think, that these programs are not operating in precisely the way that some within the Black community thought that they might at one time. And so, for instance, there was an organization, Black Alliance for Educational Options, which existed for a time. It was a civil rights organization that was specifically designed to focus on voucher solutions, but it folded a few years ago now. And it's the overwhelming story really is that the NAACP and other major civil rights organizations are opposed to vouchers on the grounds that they're a red herring. They're not actually able to help the kids that they, in some cases, purport to help.
I mean, I think we're turning in that conversation, but it took a while. I mean, here in New York, I still feel like there's a ways to go in pushing back on vouchers or school choice. Chicago, obviously, it was a huge issue. But I guess we can turn our conversation back to a little bit more of the mid 20th century in the post Brown era. How much did these voucher advocates or school choice advocates struggle to gain traction? Because it seems to me that while the groundwork was laid, the explosion really only happened, as you say, post 2010, and now there's like this religious framework that they're using in order to push these policies forward. How did the trajectory change in that post 2010 era, and what happened prior to that in order for the explosion to happen?
Okay, so I think that the the existence of those segregationist tuition grant vouchers was, an active obstacle to the success of the school choice movement, because it tainted the cause with racism, frankly, and with supporting the white supremacist institutions and being part of that. And so I think for a number of decades after the demise of the segregationist tuition grant vouchers, which were all of them struck down as unconstitutional by 1970. So we don't have any of those tuition grant vouchers in place going into the 70s. And we get this really sort of slow, sluggish growth. I mean, I think that the demand on the part of some parts of the private school community is there. I mean, I think that there is, a concern, for instance, about funding for parochial schools and things, and sort of religious conservatives trying to sort of think about how vouchers might help their cause. Of course, a plurality of private schools in the United States are religious in character, not a majority, but a plurality. But the problem is that they find themselves butting up again and again against legal obstacles, and in particular, of course, the First Amendment, which says that there should be no establishment of religion. And so the big concern here is, if you're providing public money to schools that are religious in character, whether that's parochial schools, Christian schools, other religious schools, then you are violating the separation of church and state. And so there's all these sort of efforts that are made over a number of years by various different advocates. As I say, in Ohio they succeed, in Wisconsin they succeed, but really those are very few examples. And they're butting up against these constraints. I think, again, it's partly because they still haven't worked out what the right strategy is. I think that there is, most of these programs are kind of direct appropriation. So you give the money to the parent and the parent spends it at the school. But other than that, it's not kind of hiding the role of the state particularly effectively. And so that really does concern us, sort of concern the establishment, invoke these establishment questions. But then I think there's a big change that occurs. I mean, first of all, we get Zelma versus Simmons-Harris, which is the big US Supreme Court precedent that says these vouchers are constitutional because they're directed via the parents and not directly to the religious school. So that is a part of that legal cushioning. But I think the real story is that conservatives hit on the right formula. And that is, they decide that it's better to direct this money not through direct appropriation, but through tax expenditures, through tax credit voucher programs. So, you deduct taxation from donations to these organizations called scholarship tuition organizations, which then administer the voucher to the parent to spend on behalf of the child. There's this incredibly convoluted line that separates out the state from the school, the ultimate beneficiary of these funds. And they also develop a whole series of legal arguments that can support that in court. So they use what's called child benefit theory to make the argument in court that it's not a benefit directly to the religious institution. It is a benefit to the child and thus constitutional. So it's the marriage of these things. And it's the ability of those supporters to say, look, hey, this is about private individual choice. And that thus it is constitutionally acceptable in a way that directly providing funding to the religious schools would not be. So that, I think, is part of the story that happens after 2010, because that's when you get this massive expansion in the number of voucher programs, but also specifically tax credit voucher programs. They can say, it's not public money. And when I go around, I spend a lot of time. I spent 8 years talking to 100 advocates, union members, school board members, state legislators, members of committees, a cardinal at one point, who was actually pretty instrumental in getting the Illinois tax credit voucher over the line. So that's an interesting point. But anyway, all of these people, and they're saying those who are supporters of this cause are saying, well, hey, don't say vouchers. It's a dirty word. It's a dirty word. We don't use that word. We're very careful about how we communicate in this fight. And it's been really successful.
Yeah. So I guess they found their, after decades and decades of trying, it seems like they found at least a sweet spot that they'll be able to exploit for a little while until maybe there's some catching on about, even though they've pivoted to a more, an approach that targets religion as opposed to race, because they couldn't really hide their racism early on, right? The tax credit thing, that's what causes this explosion, right? I mean, politicians saw that they could distance themselves from these policies with the tax credit almost being a buffer in between what they were supporting, because there are there are some degrees of separation, at least, between X politician and Y policy. Now you have not plausible deniability, but it seems like you basically have a system that seems like it could be neutral on its face that you're supporting, but that really does fund the right-wing politics that you're probably in favor of.
Well, I mean, I think I'm officially agnostic about the legal value of any of these arguments that they're making. I mean, I think that is a job for lawyers to determine what the true constitutional meaning is. And all I simply observe is that people are making these arguments, and that if you look, I have this incredible data set I've collected on judicial responses to these programs over the last 70 years. So you can see how judges and justices, both the Supreme Court, but also lower courts, state courts, appeals courts, are actually how they're adjudicating these disputes. And one thing we know, I mean, this is clearly a very partisan issue. Republican appointed judges and justices are statistically significantly more likely to uphold these things as constitutional than their Democratic appointed counterparts. I mean, anyone could have told you that. But not only is there a story about partisanship here, but even when we control statistically for partisanship, there is an effect of policy design. So how you're choosing to design that policy matters in court. You can see how judges and justices are taking up some of these rationales and starting to and propagating them and using them in different decisions, and that's also driving this as well. So I think it's a marriage of the policy design strategy and also the rhetorical strategy as well. It's very important.
Can you give us a bit of an example of how different approaches are met, how judges respond to some of these different approaches, and which ones are successful and which ones are not?
Right. So the federal Supreme Court in 2010 heard this big case, Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization versus Wynn, which was a case. It was probably the next big jurisprudential landmark that followed Zelman versus Simmons Harris, and it was pertained in particular to Arizona's tax credit voucher program. So it was looking at the constitutionality of that program, and there was a really strong conservative liberal split, as you can imagine, right? 5-4 at that time, and all the conservatives are in the majority, and they're saying this is constitutional because this is not public money, effectively, because it's a tax expenditure. So we're not collecting the tax on these donations to these organizations, and so that is not public money, and that therefore it's constitutional. The minority, the liberals, say, well, hang on a second, targeted tax breaks and direct social spending are simply different means of accomplishing precisely the same objective, to provide a benefit to an organization or to an individual. So I think that's a really stark example of a case where these disputes about tax expenditure analysis come into play, and you can start to see how the conservatives have really won that battle.
Yes. So, I mean, then I guess we can talk about the post-Wynn era. We touched on it a little bit, but in terms of just tracking the promulgation of these kinds of programs, take us through how explosive that growth was.
Okay, so we have like 8 programs, I think, that were in operation in 2000 on the eve of Zelman versus Simmons Harris, or like just before. And there are like more than 60 today. So it's a huge expansion in the number of programs. The actual numbers in terms of students, I mean, we're edging up towards 1 million, but I think various different estimates about how many students are actually taking advantage of these programs. But I think it's not just about the sheer numbers who have are taking that voucher, but also the wider story about the school systems in which they are embedded. And that's the concern, I think, from teacher unions, where they're saying, under state constitutional law, there is an obligation for the state to provide for a public, adequate, equitable, whatever the language is, different states have different language, a public education, and that this is a violation of that duty. And so, that's the broader context, I think, and then that sort of gives you a sense of just how explosive it's been. I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing new breeds of education savings accounts. Of course, Betsy DeVos, as education secretary, was a big fan of education savings accounts. She never actually succeeded in getting the Michigan effort over the line, but certainly there is that sort of push for various different types of voucher program. And I think the thing that really maybe is concerning for liberals in the modern day, and you mentioned at the very beginning, of course, we do have a more conservative ascendance on the High Court. And this ground game that's been laid at the state level, which I always think people should pay even more attention to from Republicans and conservatives.
I'll ask you about that after this.
Oh, yeah. You will? Okay, I'll leave off on that. But I think that the story now needs to turn to questions of in terms of free exercise questions. And actually, the story I'm telling in my book is one of conservatives kind of being on the back foot and going, well, what can we do? How can we try to insulate our programs from challenge where we feel like we're maybe not on a secure legal footing? What can we do strategically? I think that the story now is, okay, we've actually won some of these arguments, and maybe it's about the exclusion of religious schools from some of these programs that becomes the new battleground. And that's where liberals maybe need to start thinking in these strategic ways as well, if they're going to retain some of their policy commitments in this new landscape.
Part of it, too, is just the conservative legal apparatus is just so, and the way that they're able to push conservative judges on courts. I mean, there's nothing equivalent on the left, and that's something that liberals need to reckon with, I think. But when you brought up just how much ground is being gained by conservatives on the state level, that's like a million alarm bells go off for me, because I think, you don't get the national attention on those topics and on those stories that they deserve. But this is a clear example of the tangible consequences of those successes by the conservatives. In your research, what did you find in terms of conservative gains on the state level, and how this affected this topic specifically?
Yeah, so the big moment, as I say, 2010 is a really, really big moment. You can see just the number of vouchers just shoots up, but you see that as part of a whole package of conservative policy. This is the shellacking, right? It's Obama's midterms. It's huge surge on the Republican side. It's an effort to get right to work laws passed, for instance. It's an effort to get school choice laws passed, and you get a whole series of conservative policy agenda items that are being sort of advanced in the states. But I think we even see today, there is still an advantage in terms of the partisan composition of the current state legislatures. You've got, I think it's 61 chambers that are currently controlled by Republicans, 37 by Democrats. So there is a disparity there. And I think that has so many consequences, as we know, for electoral democracy, not only for policy outcomes, but also for redistricting and for the sort of follow the candidates that are going to go on to federal office. The people getting that kind of ground game and allowing people to sort of develop their skills and then go on to the federal level. So there's so many things that are important about the states that I think we need to pay more attention to, and we can still see that Republican advantage in terms of the number of seats that are controlled. And of course, we also need to think about some of these judges and their elected appointees. And so, as I say, I find a very strong Republican partisan effect of the Republican appointed judges and justices who are going on and ruling in a more conservative direction on these issues. So, yeah, absolutely, we need to pay much more attention to the state level. And I think there are liberal efforts that are going on right now to try and think more strategically about that. The other thing I should say is that there's all sorts of organizations that are really good at sharing information around the states, particularly on the conservative side. You see it on the liberal side too, but organizations like ALEC, for instance, but all these foundations, Cato and Heritage, Institute for Justice. I've spoken to some of the members of those organizations, and also speaking to state legislators across the whole country, and seeing from them that they're getting together, they're learning about what works. They're saying, okay, so we're going to meet up, we're going to see what bills work in other places, and see how we can try and overcome some of the obstacles in our own state in order to try and advance the cause.
So you mentioned Betsy DeVos a little bit earlier. I guess we can now, and we've very organically gotten to the more present day here. If I recall correctly, the Trump administration was trying to do a tax credit scholarship fund. I forget if they succeeded. It's all such a blur. They did, right? So tell us a little bit about that, because that seems to be like for conservatives who might have been pushing these tax credits and these voucher programs. That's like a we're here moment, because they've nationalized it in a way that probably wasn't as might have seemed unimaginable to the racists in the post-Brown era, right? Wow, we have this massive victory on the national level. What happened there, and how has that affected this from a national perspective?
Right. So they certainly extended the tax advantaged education sort of what was a college savings account became a K through 12. You could use it for K through 12 expenses as well. And that was a big win for DeVos. I mean, she's been at the vanguard of efforts to try and push for these programs in her home state, certainly. And so when she got the opportunity at the federal level, I think that was a really major moment, certainly for her. I suppose I would just push back a little bit against this idea that this is the big moment for the voucher cause, because actually I think it's still the case, although the federal involvement in education it has been increasing steadily, particularly from the 1960s onwards, but it's still very much a state level issue. And I think that a lot of these battles, certainly they ultimately find themselves at the federal Supreme Court sometimes, but a lot of these are resolved at the state level with respect to state constitutions and state policy pressures. So, and DeVos had been conspicuously unsuccessful in her home state of Michigan, trying to get the voucher cause passed, and had all these ballot initiatives, which was getting thrown back. And I mean, the level of public support for these programs varies a lot by question wording. So how you word the poll really matters. If you say are you in favor of educational choice, everyone's like, yeah. But if you start talking about vouchers, people are a bit less keen. So I think there's a sort of educational or informational question there as well. And actually, I mean, this is maybe this is slightly off, but just in relation to a point that you made a little bit earlier about kind of information and people being, I mean, so there's a broader sort of scholarship about these privatized modes of policy delivery that focuses on citizens and how individual citizens understand the work that government does for them. And there's a really big and very persuasive, I would say, research that shows that people don't give government credit for what it does, because in part because of the ways in which these convoluted ways in which these programs are delivered. And you saw that classically on healthcare and Obamacare, and people sort of saying, get your government hands off my Medicare. And you just think, well, yes, it's a government program, but people might not perceive it as such, because the ways in which these things are delivered is very, very complex. And sometimes it's through private organizations. So you might not see what the government is doing in your everyday life. So there's a whole great, rich set of research on citizen reactions. I'm focusing here on the courts, and the judges are not hoodwinked. I mean, judges, this is a high information environment. I mean, they are not fooled. It's not that people are being fooled about whether the government is involved or not, but what they are being given is persuasive rationales. And that can come from people like DeVos and her colleagues. It can come from the state level. I mean, it can come from all sorts of different places. But they're using those in order to bolster their arguments, in terms of deciding whether these things are constitutional or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, we can kind of return to the beginning. It's a very American concept, like the submerged state that's part of what you write about in your book as well. And I very much blame Democrats in many ways for this, because you mentioned healthcare. In the pandemic, there was this huge fight about whether to temporarily expand Medicare for people who lost their jobs, and Pelosi fought tooth and nail to make sure that wasn't the case, that it wasn't as straightforward as that they extended the benefits through all of these different, like, convoluted bureaucratic programs in a way that basically just it gifts the Republicans and the conservatives the talking point that government doesn't do anything for you, and you can focus on securing the individual rights of your child, for example, as opposed to making the government's role in these programs front and center and saying, there's a reason that Medicare has maintained and is one of the most popular programs in the country, and Social Security as well. And in the UK, universal public health care there. I mean, conservatives try to chip away at it, but it's not it's not necessarily targeted as like we're going to eliminate this or privatize that in the same way. When you make the programs more expansive and maybe public education could learn from this, and you make government front and center and you make the case that government can make your life better, it's harder to take that stuff away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that I absolutely endorse a lot of what you're saying there. But I think that, and I would add to it, which is to say that, I mean, we talked a lot about race and religion and some of the arguments that are made in court about the constitutionality of these programs. But I would say that the question about public education, the future of public education, is really, really central to these questions. And so there's a sort of argument that's made, in some cases successfully, by teacher unions that says this is, in providing money for this program, you are dismantling the public schooling system, and you are reducing the amount of money that's available for us to discharge our constitutional obligation to provide for a free, public, accessible education for all children. And so that's where this tax expenditure argument really bites, because people are able to say, well, it's not public money. This is just private individual choice, and that's all we're doing. That's all we're enabling. So yeah, I think that it really is an existential question, I think, for a lot of public school advocates. And the unions are diminished in numbers, and it's more and more difficult, I think, for them to for them to fight back in some of these places. I mean, I met a lot of very passionate individuals who are fighting this in the courts and in state houses around the country. I think that it is more and more difficult. And that part of that, I think, is also because of the close connection there is between the union movement and the Democratic Party, and the ways in which Republicans have sought to, through the agency fees question as well, for instance, to defang the unions, and in order to hobble their partisan opponents as well. So I think that this is sort of all part of that broader thrust. I think it's not something that we can think of in isolation from that broader conversation.
Yeah, and the Republican media project also spent decades demonizing teachers unions specifically. I mean, that was a huge coordinated effort. And you talk about how well coordinated some of these conservative groups are. They're coordinated well with conservative media, and the left does not have an answer for that at the current moment. So I really appreciate your time today. Ursula Hackett, author of America's Voucher Politics, How Elites Learn to Hide the State. Everyone can check out her book. Thank you so much for your time today, Ursula.
Thanks so much. Delighted to be here.
All right, folks, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will be wrapping things up. We are back. We are back. All right, Tucker Carlson and Kyle Rittenhouse, man. So, Kyle Rittenhouse, other people have made this point, and so I'm not saying anything new here, but he's going to be like a state representative in 5 years. That's my prediction. 10 years, maybe. Tucker Carlson and other Republican conservative figures are trying to make him into some sort of martyr, even though he did not end up he was acquitted on all accounts. Tucker Carlson and Fox News had been following Rittenhouse around during his trial, I believe filming some sort of documentary with him. And as a part of that larger propaganda effort, Tucker Carlson sat down with Rittenhouse for a primetime interview on his acquittal. Here is one part of that interview in which Rittenhouse just states how he wished nothing would have ever happened and the incident where he murdered 2 people would have never happened. I wish that too. I wish that he did not kill those 2 people. Interesting how he takes himself out of the equation there. And he just is so sick of how this topic is being polarized.
This is not the life that you planned, obviously.
No, it is far from the life I planned. This is something that I wish never would have happened, but it did, and we can't change that. But how it's been how polarized it became is absolutely sickening. Yeah. Like, right or left, people using me for a cause that should never have been used as a cause.
So, he was just an apolitical actor, man, when he took an AK-47-like gun, or, I'm sorry, an AR-15. I really don't know guns, guys, sorry if I butcher that. Or he took an assault-style rifle, and he went to a protest, and he killed 2 people, and he said he was there to protect property. That was purely apolitical, right? It's everybody else that's politicizing this. Hold, because Rittenhouse chooses to make a political point in like 2 seconds after that.
Do you think you can have that you can live peacefully in this country unmolested?
I hope so, but I can't read the future. I'm hoping that people go back and understand the facts and be like, watch the trial, watch the prosecutorial misconduct that I believe happened, and realize that I was an innocent 17-year-old who was violently attacked and defended myself.
Because you wanted to clean graffiti and protect a car lot.
And apparently, a lot of people on the left, it's criminal to want to protect your community.
Do you feel like your life's been destroyed by this?
I feel my life has been extremely defamed by it. I don't think I would be able to go out and get a job and not have to deal with harassment. But I'm at a place now to where I have to have people with me because people want to kill me just because I defended myself, and they're too ignorant to look at the facts of what happened.
Okay, so first of all, he then sneers and talks about the left. I don't understand why this is being so politicized, man. I'm just really disgusted, and I will always be disgusted by how the right is going to decide to make this kid into some sort of victim. If he wanted to go clean graffiti, which apparently was one of his hobbies before he decided to go to a protest with a gun and then ended up killing people and severely injuring a third. If he wanted to go clean graffiti, where the hell were his rubber gloves and fucking sponge, right? I mean, did he want to just obliterate the brick wall with graffiti on it with as many guns or bullets as he possibly could? It's just the propaganda effort on behalf of Tucker Carlson. You can't make it up. It's so blatant and it's so disgusting. And, look, he was 17. I understand that. And so it's easier to portray him as the victim of this. And I can understand somebody saying, all right, he was 17 years old and he has the ability to be redeemed, and I believe everybody does. But the issue that I'm seeing is that everyone around him and everybody in the conservative press is basically rewarding him for these actions. He's feeling emboldened by this. He completely seems to feel no remorse. He has removed himself and removed his agency from the murders that he committed. I mean, the way he talks about it in this cold, disconnected way, disassociated way, basically speaks to the fact that he feels and has feels very little remorse and has eaten up the bullshit that's been fed to him, that he was the victim of this situation. So, one, on a personal level, this kid is just going to probably revel in this new fame, and Madison Cawthorn is offering him an internship, and Tucker Carlson's having him on a primetime interview spot. Like, he's actually learned that when, Tucker Carlson says, do you feel that this has destroyed your life? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This kid's like a new mascot for the GOP. Has this destroyed his life? As I said, he's going to run for Congress, state legislature, whatever it is. He has a future in the Republican Party. Don Jr. just tweeted out or Instagrammed a Photoshop photo of 2024, his father, putting the Congressional Medal of Freedom on Rittenhouse. Has this destroyed your life? No, everything that Tucker Carlson and Fox News and the Republican Party is doing is ensuring that this kid is set up for success. They are finding him to be a very useful tool so that there are more Kyle Rittenhouses throughout the country. That's what Republicans want. And the fact that they're setting him up as this avatar of conservative aggrievement allows for that. They want to multiply Kyle Rittenhouses. They want to ensure that left-wing protests and agitation is chilled, and that they have a vigilante force that roams the streets and does things like this. The American legal system is independent of the merits of the Kyle Rittenhouse case, which, I'm not going to comment on because I'm not a lawyer, but I can take a larger view of the way our system is set up and what self-defense laws allow for. And we have open carry laws in a variety of states which incentivize basically murder and getting away with it. We're not cowboys. We're in a civilized society, apparently, or we're supposed to be. And so our legal system has basically set up an incentive structure for more Kyle Rittenhouses. And then pair that with the conservative media apparatus and conservative politicians who are cheering this kid on. Oh man, we're going to see more of this. So just buckle up.
And can I just add one thing?
Yes, Bradley. No longer on the box.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing about this too is, I understand that it's hard to parse because, of course, people are like, he's a 17-year-old. He didn't know, he didn't really know what he was doing or something like that. But at the same time, it's like, if you don't know what you're doing, you have an assault rifle and you put yourself in that position, there's negligence involved. Mm-hmm. So it's like, obviously, like you said, I'm not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer, but at the same time, to have no culpability for that whatsoever. And I do understand where to an extent where people are like, the left is not parsing the details of the case. But yeah, the left didn't represent the guy legally and keep him in jail to raise his bail fund, Mm-hmm. It's like there is proportionality here in who's using him more.
Exactly. Again, I'm not commenting on the facts of the case, as we're saying. I'm talking about what the implications of this case mean and what the case says about the larger structural reality of America and how conservatives are currently exploiting it. I mean, we saw this with Zimmerman too. When the kid's going to sell that gun for $5 million, right? Totally. Yeah. All right, guys. We are going to head into the fun half, and we will be joined by Nomiki Konst. So, some fun stuff coming up. Check out Left Reckoning. Matt is not with us today. He is off for the Thanksgiving holiday, but of course, check that out. JustCoffee.coop, fair trade tea, coffee, and chocolate. Use the code majority. Get a little bit of a discount on your coffee or your chocolate. And we're going to be taking your calls in the fun half. 646-257-3920. Do we have Nomi, though? So Nomi can talk a little bit about the Nomiki show. There she is. There she is.
Am I?
Well, no.
Here I am. Well, hello.
How? Guys,
Wow.
your lighting might, like, all-time cool lighting today. All-time.
Really? It's a moving target. I don't know. Variables don't change, but somehow they end up differing. No, maybe it has to do with the color of my outfit or my hair or certain things I'm not
Digging the
factoring in.
I'm digging the whole vibe.
Thank you.
So, what's happening over on the Nomiki show?
Well, hello there, Emma. On this week's The Nomiki Show, we have tonight on Rockfin for TNS Live, we are doing an extended long conversation with the one and only John Nichols. He's going to talk to us about all sorts of things, but we really get, because he's from Wisconsin, we are digging in on the Rittenhouse case and just all of the variables and how the legal system has been an experiment, obviously a very successful experiment of the Koch brothers and other conservative forces that created a scenario right before Rittenhouse getting off. And then later this week, we have an interview with Dr. Manuel Pastor, who talks about Beto's chance and his path to victory with Latinos in Texas and whether or not that's a doable thing this time around.
John Nichols is, one, he's a great writer, but he is just so easy to talk to about these topics.
So easy to talk to. We cut off our conversation 6 times and then we just kept talking and talking. And then when we did actually end the conversation, because it's a pre-tape, guys, sorry to tell you, even though it's live,
I mean,
I just gave it up.
Thanksgiving. Everyone's doing pre-tapes, so.
Exactly. But we ended up ending, and then we talked for another 45 minutes afterwards off.
Brilliant. And also maybe the nicest guy in the industry, so everyone should definitely check that out. He's got great.
Nice.
Yes, so
Wisconsin. Wisconsin people are so sweet when they're not, racists.
Well, and Nichols is not one, so there we go.
Exactly.
We are going to head into the fun half, where we will, as we said, I will be taking your calls. Nomi and I will be chatting with you. We'll be doing some clips. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238-56-27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, going to take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.